For around 12 years, I've dedicated my life to the beautiful craft known as digital art, and even then, I was perfecting my skills traditionally, but still there are things I wish I knew sooner that would have made me go from the level I am to levels way beyond conceivable. I'm going to be sharing this sacred advice to you, so I'm trusting you to not only listen, but to also take it in and devour it like some kind of monster, and create the best art piece you've ever created. This advice will range from the best practices and exercises to increase your performance, all the way to the best art supplies that are cheap and reliable. So stay tuned because there will be something for everyone. Also, if you enjoy this video and or find it helpful, consider subscribing and joining the Discord server below. It's a slowly growing community of artists who would all love to see your art and hear your advice too. And also, if you have anything that I've not mentioned or you have something you want to talk about in the description in the comments below, feel free to write a comment. I try to respond to everybody, and let's just jump right in. So we're going to start off super simple. Practicing proper anatomy and scale is a quick fire way to improve your art. Even when you're doing cartoonish art styles, proper anatomy is really, really important because it basically shapes the way your character looks. People can tell when something looks even a little bit off. Knowing how to proportion your character's heads to the arms and torso is super great when it comes to making your art more advanced. Obviously, for certain characters, it's useful to stray away from proportions. You know, for example, if you're creating a monster, you want them to appear more bigger, especially like the torso area. But you know, a good knowledge of actual sizing and scale in reference to the body is mega important, and it also boosts your consistency. So it helps your art style be more consistent, which is great if you're looking to take your art to a professional level. Some great exercises to do that will help, learn anatomy and, figure out how proportions work is to kind of just reference real life people. Drawing real life people is such a great way to get proportions because it helps you actually see the real thing. And obviously, don't just take from one person, take from multiple people, take from like children and take from elders. You want to get as much knowledge as possible so that you can get as much like knowledge and kind of just like take your art using that knowledge. So yeah, using other people as reference, just drawing from life is a great way to improve that anatomy and scale. Another thing is if you're not completely confident with referencing images, which is where you're looking at it and going off of the image, tracing it if you do digitally, you can even do it traditionally as well actually, but tracing is another way to practice your anatomy. And obviously, just make sure to let people know that it's traced if you're going to publish it anywhere. But yeah, tracing is perfectly fine in the sense of learning and figuring things out, um, as long as you give proper credit where credit is due. Another great tip in terms of exercises to do is practicing drawing certain parts of the body because it helps you grow consistent, and it also helps you learn how each of the body parts work and how they move, which in turn helps you learn how to draw more efficiently. The reason this works is because when you understand something more and understand how it moves and like interacts with other body parts, you kind of get that knowledge that helps you to recognize when things kind of look off or look a little bit like strange. It'll help you to be able to revise your body parts to be the best they can, basically. I personally do this by drawing like 100 body parts, but you can do any amount or practice in time limits instead. For example, instead of doing like 20 eyes, you can do 10 minutes of drawing eyes. And it's just a great way to be able to like focus, really, really focus on just like a specific body part. But also don't only do one body part, like, mix it up a bit, do like, 10 minutes of eyes, 10 minutes of hands. You don't have to do it all at once, just like throughout the week or like throughout the month or however you want to do it. Just like try and incorporate a few of these exercises to help you kind of like figure out and focalize on different body parts because it really does improve your art in the end. You should also differentiate what colors you use. For example, if in one art you feel like a more desaturated look would work, that's great, but you shouldn't always stick to the same colors because it makes your art feel more lively when you switch it up a little bit. Like when drawing the same character, you should have the same base colors, but try to think about the environment that your character's in and shade with the colors that complement that environment rather than using the same purple or black shading techniques, where you lower the opacity of like black or purple. And especially when it comes to shading digitally, a lot of people immediately draw to shading with black and lowering the opacity. And whilst there's nothing inherently wrong with that, like with that style of shading, it makes your art feel kind of lackluster and it adds this muddy like dullness to it, which is fine if that's what you're going for. But I think learning colors is just like so important, and just making sure that your environment fits the color that you're thinking about. I just think it really helps boost your art. And I personally believe like you should learn the fundamentals of color theory when you do art, because it does really help your knowledge and help you understand what to put where, if that makes sense. Speaking of colors, if you haven't heard of complementary colors or learned about that, then that's another great thing to keep in mind. Looking at the color wheel, the complementary colors are the ones across from each other. For example, blue and orange, red and green, and purple and yellow. The thing is, when also looking at this color wheel, you should also keep in mind that there are warm tones and cool tones. The warm tones being red, orange, yellow, and the cool tones being blue, green, purple. And it's super important to understand this because, the way that you pair up your colors really matters. Like, it really does enhance the piece. And yeah, so keep in mind complementary colors, they complement each other and they really help boost the visuals of your art. As I was looking at a lot of beginner artists' art, and don't worry, I struggle with this myself, I noticed that there's not a lot of dynamic posing or perspective, which is understandable because it's a super hard thing to master. When it comes to perspective, I personally find it easier to work from references using just my eyes. Whereas some people like to draw out their environment using a grid and, making like a sphere grid. It all depends on how your brain manages to store information visually. Like some people use maths to help keep the backgrounds more coherent and realistic. But I prefer to focus on the simplicity and kind of blocking color and shapes until it comes together. This one rule for me personally is denied by realism, which is where I would draw a 4x4 grid on my reference and the page I'm working on, which is the grid method. And this makes my art a lot more coherent and uniform, which helps it to be more realistic. Although, to be honest, it's rare that I ever draw true realism. Anyway, basically, just work on your perspective. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just try new things when it comes to perspective, because the sooner you try, the sooner you'll get better at it. So another thing that really helps boost your art is trying a variety of techniques and applying them to your work outside of like practicing, I guess. For example, cross-hatching with colored pencils, or changing the quality of your line, which is the size of your line art and how refined or stabilized it is. Basically, try different techniques, but don't change the way you draw, if that makes sense. Like, don't change your art style, but change the techniques that you're using to incorporate your art style. I don't even know if that makes sense. Basically, applying skills like these to your work can help to create texture and like more interest in your work. Also, varying what you know and how you learn it also really helps you open up your mind to different ways of creating. Most people tend to overlook this one or use them incorrectly, but references are so underrated when it comes to art. Even more experienced artists use them, and there's no shame in it. At first, it might be easier to block in the shapes over top your reference, so sort of tracing the shapes and the general idea or concept of the pose, but obviously try to refrain from doing that as much as possible because it kind of limits you from training that hand-eye coordination and being able to draw what you see, which really limits you as an artist. And it might not seem like it, but it's such a bad habit to trace over your references in the long run. Now, I'm not saying that tracing is bad, because I don't think it is. I think it's a great way to get used to drawing and getting used to like learning proper anatomy and proper proportions, but it also hinders you if you do it too much. So don't tend to like take the easy route when you trace, because I feel like blocking in the shapes and then using your own art style to incorporate that pose is way better for, creating your art, because it helps you to learn and it helps you to focus on learning. So, yeah. Outside of general techniques and advice, there's also things outside of art that can affect your ability to create and make beautiful pieces.
Nice.
So first and foremost, make sure to take care of yourself mentally and physically. This is something I've talked about a lot on my channel because it's so important in everyday life, not just for your art. After all, your mind is the thing that holds the ability to create, and your physical body is the thing that hones that ability into talent. So making sure you have enough nutrients and water is one of the most important things you can do for your body. People are supposed to drink around 8 cups of water a day, and I used to drink literally none, but when it came to my art, I felt blocked. And when I started drinking more water because I started doing more exercise, it actually helped me so much because I felt more like awake and alive, and I started to actually create more. Next is for your mental health, and that's drawing things that actually motivate you, whether it be plants, sports, a specific hobby that you enjoy, even drawing fan art of your favorite characters. If you're only drawing hands or eyes or, other people's characters, and you don't truly enjoy the subject that you're drawing, you're not going to want to continue drawing or to continue practicing. And practicing is the only way to change in how you create, which is how you improve. I know growing up I tried to only draw like my own characters, which is all good and well, but you don't get the added influence of other art styles or things that you enjoy which boost your art. You don't really learn by drawing the same thing for years and years. And finally, I want to talk about good art supplies for beginners. Personally, when it comes to supplies, I don't ever buy a lot of art supplies at once. I like to buy them one by one so I can get a feel for each supply and incorporate them into my art at my own pace. The first ever art supply I feel anyone should have is a pencil. You can get these for super cheap from pretty much most stores. You can also buy the multi-pack ones that come with like 50 cheap pencils, and really there's nothing wrong with a cheap pencil. They typically erase well and they're able to handle most art projects and are super easy to get used to holding since most people own or have used a pencil before. Another easy art supply to have that I think is a staple is ballpoint pens, especially for doing line art or creating detail. There are so many things you can do with ballpoint pens, even if it doesn't feel like it at first. Some of my favorite techniques with these generic tools of art are stippling, using dots to create value within the art, feathering, using the pen softly or at an angle to create like lighter or fluffy lines, and cross-hatching to create texture and depth. Now, for adding color to your work, any of the following works great. You can get cheap colored pencils, which can be used in so many ways to add vibrance to your art. Water-based markers can also be found for cheap in places like The Range or Home Bargains if you're British. Another alternative is paint markers. They do have off-brand Poscas, which are a lot cheaper and have a typical similar quality, but also general like acrylic paint markers also are really good for bold colors. It kind of depends on what kind of art you like to create. In terms of like what to draw on or what you want to create art on, I highly recommend a cheap but sturdy sketchbook. That way you're not going to fear making it ugly as much as if you bought like an expensive one. I think a lot of people's biggest issues when it comes to art is that they don't want to start, especially in a new book, because they're somehow like afraid that they're going to ruin it. But that's just it. You bought that book so like to have for yourself. It's quite literally for your art, and so you shouldn't feel guilty for drawing in it, even if it's like bad. Especially with social media, it's easy to get caught up in how everyone else's sketchbooks look. Oh my god, English. And how aesthetic each one is. But really, you should only be taking inspiration from other people, not trying to copy their sketchbook one for one. It really hinders your ability as an artist if you constantly compare your art to others. Overall, the most important thing to remember is that you don't need fancy equipment or supplies to make good art, and there's proof of this on YouTube everywhere. The key to how good your art is how well you're able to use the materials you have at hand. In fact, I think having a limited set of like art supplies as a beginner is a great like way to improve because it helps you get a figure of what kind of art you like to make, as well as gives you time to learn the tools you have at hand and get the most out of them. Finding new ways to use old materials is so unique and it really boosts your art. Having that ability to create from nothing is so important for artists. So that's why I believe that having like the bare minimum materials as a beginner is really, really great. Overall, those were my tips and advice that I have personally for beginner artists. If you have any more ideas or advice you'd like to give, please share in the comments below or join the Discord server and share them there. We'd all love to hear your opinions and your advice because we all just want to improve. And with that, I hope you have an amazing day and I'll see you all next video. Bye!